So I was reading a newspaper column this morning from the Washington Examiner, and it actually comes from Selena Zitta, who's a columnist at used to be the Pittsburgh Post Gazette. I bring that up right off the top because I have a guest in studio who hails from. He's going to be listening in today, just as he said, as a fly on the wall. He hails from the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, where I still have a lot of family. And in her column, she was pointing out that she was in a waiting room at a doctor's office last week when people were offering advice on the Today Show about how to tell your children about Donald Trump's victory in the election the other day. Now, I don't know about all of you, but if you're that traumatized by an election, the issues in your life might be greater than just politics alone. But she was pointing out that out of 400 and some odd Appalachian counties, and what's designated by the government as Appalachia runs not only from way down in Alabama, but up the spine of the Appalachian Mountains into the Alleghenies, then through the Allegheny foothills into upstate New York and out toward the Catskill Mountains there. Out of 410 counties, something on that nature, it's a large, large number. Only 21 of them broke for Hillary Clinton. And those were generally where colleges and universities are located. So you had people who were on that end of things, your academics voting for Clinton, but everyone else in what you'd call one of the most working class parts of America got on board with Donald Trump. And the union numbers are astounding too, as well. Just the changes in the numbers of union members who voted for Barack Obama twice, who turned around and voted, and in Ohio, of all places, it turns out that union members actually voted more for Trump than they did Hillary Clinton. And the numbers were so close in many other states, it gave Trump that big win in many other portions of the country that he was not expected to win, especially in many of these states that rim that rust belt around the Great Lakes. I got a couple of notes I wanted to make quickly, if we could, before we really get into the meat and potatoes of the program, and just a couple of quick notes. Well, Randy Staples is scheduled to join us coming up at 8:40 this morning. And if you didn't see Randy's column over the weekend, he is pointing out that there was a lot of hope that Democrats would be gaining seats in Idaho. Number one, that they thought they would take Heather Scott's seat in northern Idaho. She won with two-thirds of the vote. That they thought they would take two seats here in the 24th District in Twin Falls and the surrounding environs. They did not. In fact, they didn't even get close. They didn't get within about 20 points. So it was a bad night for Democrats across the state, and in fact in Idaho, even with a huge influx of population from places like California. I think I've told you the story before. When I first moved here, I was having Cable One installed in my house, and the installer was telling me that he moved here 10 years ago from San Francisco. I said, "Well, what brought you here?" "Well, I wanted to raise my kids here instead of the city." A year later, I'm moving into a new apartment, and I'm getting DirecTV installed, and the installer says to me, "I moved here from California." And I said, "Well, what brought you here?" "Well, I wanted to raise my kids here instead of there." So you've got a lot of these transplants, but apparently they aren't coming here and voting for Democrats. They're coming here, and apparently they realize that the lifestyle they have is because we may have a Republican government. And so it shouldn't be too difficult to see that there were not going to be any great inroads. And in fact, Democrats lost seats in the state legislature. They lost in the Lewiston area, where for a long, long time that has been more purple than anything else. They lost two seats in that immediate area, and one of them from one of the more prominent leaders working at the state capitol. This, on the other hand, looking at this today, as we start to take a look at some of the national politics, Eric Erickson, who was never on Donald Trump's, how shall we put it, list, if you will. He was one of the first leaders of that Never Trump movement. And at his website today, The Resurgent, he's first of all, he's come to terms with Trump's victory. I want to mention that. He has come to terms with it, and he's actually happy with some of the moves Trump has been making since election night. But he's referencing this sign that appeared. If you have not taken a look at the internet, maybe you've been on Mars over the last few days, there was a sign that appeared at a rally outside of Donald Trump's tower in New York City, where you have the daily riots going on. And it suggested that somebody should rape Melania Trump. And according to Erickson, had such a sign appeared when Barack Obama was elected, or had it appeared at any Tea Party rally, the entirety of the conservative movement would have been indicted by the American media complex. So last night, Donald Trump is on CBS on 60 Minutes with Leslie Stahl. And Stahl asked him to denounce the alt-right. That would be the group of people out there who apparently are giving a hard time to American liberals. And American liberals already are playing with the Play-Doh on campuses and getting crayons and being allowed to pet puppies. And now the big bullies of the alt-right are coming along, and the alt-right bullies, they're trying to, how shall we put it, intimidate the other side. Through name calling, apparently, and sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but names will never hurt me is no longer it's no longer an appliance any longer, because hurting people's feelings is, well, we should jail them, right? So Trump was asked if he would apologize for what they're doing, and Mr. Trump, and I believe this is the actual clip from 60 Minutes last night. If you've got a moment, it's only a few seconds long. Take a listen.
I am so saddened to hear that, and I say stop it. If it helps, I will say this, and I'll say it right to the camera: stop it.
Now, I don't know that anybody has asked President Obama or Hillary Clinton to call on the demonstrators in the major American cities who are right now looting stores, smashing windows, and setting fires. I don't know that Leslie Stahl or any of her colleagues have said, "Hey, how come you haven't asked these people to cool it?" I think there's an answer as to why. Because if you're sitting in those chairs, you think it's okay that that's going on, that property is being damaged, and that people are holding. Now, I will give credit. I saw on Morning Joe today a complete denunciation by the Morning Joe panel about what's going on with people holding up signs suggesting that Mrs. Trump should be raped. In fact, it came out of the mouth of, and she surprised me many times during the election season, but Mika Brzezinski, she's got no love for anyone who does anything like that. And the rest of the panel joined in, including Steve Ratner, who's the economist who normally is the biggest whiner when he sits in on that program. They all agreed that this is absolutely wrong. And I would tend to agree with them. The other big story that's coming out of all of this over the weekend is, we heard that the dead might be voting. Well, did you know that the Walking Dead were actually voting? Michael Dukakis, yeah, he's still alive. Michael Dukakis was telling the Politico that we need to scrap the Electoral College. It should have been scrapped, according to him, 150 years ago. Dukakis says we need to let the majority rule in this country. Did you know? And Hillary Clinton still maintains a lead. It's tens of thousands, if not a couple of 100,000 votes in the actual vote totals that are coming in, and those are expected to grow as some absentees are counted in some of the larger states, California being a good example, where she did well. So yes, you have perhaps a difference. The closest election I think we ever had in the country was 1960, when 176,000 votes separated John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. This one, because we have a bigger population overall, and that would likely mean a larger voting population, but as a percentage, might be just about the same as to how close it happened to be. On the other hand, I wanted to share this clip with you. This is a little longer. This is from Arthur Thompson. He is the CEO of the John Birch Society, which often gets a bad rap, but even the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, well, they look at anyone who is to the right of Karl Marx and suggest that those people are racists or bigots. But the SPLC even says the John Birch Society is not a hate group, but a patriot group. And this is a bit long. It's almost 2 minutes in length, but I wanted you to hear this morning because let Mr. Thompson explain to you his view on this whole notion that Hillary Clinton has more votes than Donald Trump.
That is in question, simply because of these things. Does this include the dead people that voted? Does this include the illegal alien people that voted? Does this include the 60,000 felons that were forgiven just days before the election in Virginia so they could vote? You see, when you start to tally these things up, then you begin to realize, well, maybe Hillary did not get the majority. And then when you factor in fraud, I think that Trump probably had far more votes than were tallied. We do know that there were instances prior to the election in Texas, in Florida, and Pennsylvania, for sure, where people were filling in ballots or ballots were miscounted in the early votes and that sort of thing, and for Hillary and not for Trump. Instances where ballots were being filled in for our servicemen overseas. And who knows what they were filling them in for in Florida. But at any rate, those sorts of things were there. Now, the reason that the Republicans and Trump are not making an issue of it is because he won. If he had, for instance, just barely lost, I'm sure you would see lawsuits appearing in several places across the country because of known voter fraud. But that sort of thing has died down now because Trump did win. My uncle lived in Chicago, and he voted Republican his whole life until he died, and then he started to vote Democrat.
You probably have heard that one before, but it is an old joke, and there may be a bit of a truism in there when you actually hear that. That is Arthur Thompson. He is the CEO of the John Birch Society. Now, for all the people out there who are screaming about the number of votes, Hillary Clinton was expected to walk away with this election. So the soul searching that's really going on from people who are giving this some deep thought says the ball was just simply dropped by the approach she had. I was reading last weekend or late last week where in Michigan, at the last minute when they realized it was closer than they thought it would be, they went in and they did a big ad buy. And then they started talking again about the war on women. Now, some of you are familiar with this. 2 years ago, I worked on the campaign of Terry Lynn Land, who was the Republican candidate in that state. And everything that was going on at the time was war on women, war on women, war on women. I can remember on our phone banks, or when we would be out on the street in neighborhoods, in places like Pontiac and other locations that we were working at the time, we would hear that constantly because it was repeated so often. Now, she may have lost that election because of other issues. She just was a terrible candidate. But in Michigan, voters weren't concerned about the war on women. They were actually concerned about jobs this year. So Clinton's people missed the mark, and they took all of that money they'd collected from Wall Street and other wealthy donors, perhaps even some of them foreign, and they ended up throwing it away in those last few days and hours before the actual vote. And then quickly, over at the New York Times, liberal columnist Frank Bruni writing, liberals missed this by being illiberal when he's talking about how they blame everybody out there for being a racist who voted for Trump. He said they shame not just the racists and sexists who deserve it, but all who disagree. And he says a woman who's maybe 64 years old from somewhere down in the South and not on board with marriage equality finds herself characterized as a hateful boob. Never mind that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton weren't themselves on board with the very same policy just 5 years ago. I think that should tell you something about what we're dealing with here, and that is that arrogance and just the missteps they made. A writer at the Denver Post yesterday listed 7 reasons why this happened, and I had to chuckle as I read through all of them. Just so many people had blinders on. They were unable to see what actually people believed between. And if you didn't see it yesterday on Sunday morning on CBS, they did a great piece in some rural West Virginia county, and it just was so obvious. But why weren't they there 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks ago or months ago? We've got more on the way. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Also, Randy Staples joining us in about 20 minutes right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. It's 8:20 and it's 39. I'm going to call it about 20 minutes until we're joined by Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing. If you didn't get a chance to see Randy's column yesterday, he was writing specifically about election results out of Idaho here in this past week. And his belief was that the Democrats had high hopes. But clearly, I guess the question is, where did they get those from? Because it didn't turn out that way. And then coming up in the next hour of the program, Christy Zitto joins us in studio, and she is newly elected to the state legislature as a state representative. She hails from that area up around Mountain Home. In fact, on Facebook yesterday, I didn't get an invite, but apparently they had a party at AJ's, which is one of my favorite restaurants just off the highway. They had a big party there in celebration of her victory, and she'll be joining us, and she may even be taking some of your telephone calls this morning. I want to remind people we're looking at possibility of snow in the forecast on Thursday. If you did not hear that yet, please don't panic. There's a funny story today out of Sweden, and it's this. The Swedes decided that instead of plowing the roads first, they were going to clean the sidewalks and bike paths first because they said it would be more gender neutral. Because more women apparently use the bike paths and the sidewalks, and it's men doing the driving. So they had a big snowstorm in Sweden last week, and the roads didn't get plowed, and Well, the sidewalks and bike paths did, but business had to shut down for a couple of days. Policy is under review. 825, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We've dropped a bit. We're at 36 right now from, was the wind blew, I guess, and changed direction down from 39. If you have not yet gotten prepared, as I pointed out about a week and a half ago, I kicked on the furnace and let it run for a few hours just to see that it was actually working. If you haven't done that yet, give it a try. And if you've got some issues, it's not efficient or maybe it's not coming on at all, you've got to call the professionals at Ramsey Heating and Electric out in Burley. Now, the pros out there, they'll come out to the house and they'll make sure the job is done right and the job is done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. Telephone number, if you'd like to reach them, is 678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. Did you know Donald Trump was on the air with Leslie Stahl last night? Remember, his campaign was almost deep-sixed because he used the dreaded P word in a conversation with Billy Bush 10 years ago on a bus. And it became a huge campaign issue, and for a few days it looked like Donald Trump had finally immolated himself when it came to his campaign. So Trump's on TV with Leslie Stahl last night, and it suddenly, my mind went back to 1988 when then candidate and Vice President George H.W. Bush, who would be elected president, he was on the air on CBS with Dan Rather, and the two got into a sniping match. And Bush didn't give any ground. He stood there and he called out Rather for all of his blunders on air and other ridiculous things that Rather's big ego had caused disasters at CBS News and the like. And when they finished, Bush got up and he tore the microphone off his lapel and he turned to everybody sitting in the room with him and said about Dan Rather, he makes Leslie Stahl look like a... And then he used the dreaded P word. And yet, nobody at the time said he was unfit to be president of the United States. He did not vote for Donald Trump. He and his family decided they would leave the presidential line blank, and they didn't vote for anyone on that particular line. They voted down ballot. But why was it okay for George H.W. Bush to use the dreaded P word in 1988 without any consequences? And yet, when it came to Trump telling a locker room joke, we were supposed to think it was the end of the world. I got to make a quick note. We have a guest in the studio today, and some of you around town may actually be hearing from him. Chico, first of all, is from the Washington Post, which is a really big newspaper. And I have to admit, I've only ever subscribed to two newspapers in my life: the Post and the Baltimore Sun. And I almost thought the last name was Hayden, but what is it exactly?
It's Harlan.
I'm going to do that again. Try that one more time.
It's Harlan, Harlan.
Like in Sanders.
Yeah, exactly.
Colonel Sanders.
Harlan County, Kentucky.
Yeah. And we want to point out
Supreme Court Justice.
that you'll be talking to people around town about two issues in the next few days.
Well, at least. But yeah,
you're here to buy a house too. We talked about this the other day on the telephone. But you're here on number one, the election of Donald Trump and the reaction of the local community, as well as the refugee resettlement issue.
Right. I don't view them as being side by side, but they're in sort of the same
reaction
ballpark.
of voters and
Yeah.
how they reacted to that issue, and maybe it caused their vote for Trump, right, in the long run.
Or on the flip side, whether some of the anxieties that have been brewed about foreigners have just Donald Trump was the beneficiary of that mood in the country.
You know, I'm going to have to stop saying Pravda on the Potomac on the air when I talk about the Post any longer then. I actually one time, when Andrew Alexander was the ombudsman at the Post, he got angry with me one time for using that phrase. But short story, Deborah Howell, when she was in that job, I one time sent her a critique, and she actually put out an all-staff memo and mentioned my critique in it, which I'm sure people just hit delete when they saw it in their email inboxes. But we want to thank you for popping in today, and you'll be listening in, and I think you're going to find people here easy, even though I think that sometimes there's a little people leery about people in news media. I think that you'll find people here are extremely, people talk about like Minnesota nice. It's got nothing when it compares to Idaho. So you're going to enjoy a few days here.
I've already enjoyed my first, so.
Except for watching the Steelers game last night, which distressed him to no end.
It did.
Being a Pittsburgh native as he is. We've got a short break. We've got more coming up in just a moment. It's 39. Bill Colley with you as well. On Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I've been telling people those who will listen anyway, that I have had a dramatic change in my life in just the last couple of months. That is, in fact, the first 11 days I was on the diet called the Total Body Transformation System, I dropped 18 pounds in 11 days. It was amazing. I've now down about 40 overall in the last couple of months, which is probably healthier weight loss because you can put yourself in some harm's way by dropping a lot of weight. But this is a scientifically tested, proven way to lose weight, and doctors will approve of it. It's one of those things that they have a lot of research on because they're using just a number of different natural ingredients that won't harm your system. It's specifically and scientifically proven to burn 6 times more fat and lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. Now, the average participant will drop 22 pounds in 2 months. Clinical results have been published in prestigious, I'll get this out, it takes a little while on a Monday morning sometimes, prestigious scientific journals and presented at numerous scientific meetings around the world. And we pointed out those ingredients are validated scientifically, backed up with an unconditional full money back guarantee. And you need to call my friend Don Chandler, marketing executive Don Chandler. Don lost 50 pounds on this diet, and then that's what sold him. Many of you remember him from the tuxedo shop here in town. You can now reach Don at this number, 731-3560, 731-3560. If you're listening online this morning and you'd like to get in touch with Don, remember the prefix is 208-731-3560. And you can join us. I hope someday be half the man I used to be. Well, not in a figurative sense, but in a more literal sense. Wanted a couple of other quick notes since we're on this topic of elections and the like, and just maybe wrapping up some of the national stuff this morning on the program. This was the column I mentioned earlier from Selena Zito, or Zito is our next guest pronounces it, same last name, or our guest after 9 o'clock, excuse me. She was mentioning being in a doctor's office, and the Today Show was doing this segment about Trump derangement syndrome. Although there's a better one that is online. I came across this from a group called Chicks on the Right, and I signed up for their newsletters, and I believe they call it Trump, and then it's an acronym TARD, which is one of those nasty slang terms that we throw at people we don't like politically. But it's a Trump acceptance. Here it is. I think it's Trump acceptance, and then it's anyway. They refuse. There it is. Refuse disorder. That's it. TARD or TARD. And they posted that to the web yesterday, and I happened to see it. But this writer, Selena Zito, is writing. She said Republicans didn't go on the streets and start burning stuff after the election. And then she talked to a fellow who did some research into all of this, and his name is Brad Todd. He's a Republican consultant. And he went on to say, and by the way, if Trump had lost and this had happened, think how different this coverage would be. And he went on to say this. This is what I was trying to get at earlier. There are 490 counties in Appalachia, technically, which is defined by federal law. Hillary Clinton won 21 counties in that region. And then he went on to say those 21 counties she won were either college campuses, and he cited a handful of them, Virginia Tech, Cornell, Penn State, and Mississippi State, or counties in major metropolitan areas. By the way, since I mentioned our guest in studio, who is sitting in like a bug on the wall today, just taking in what's going on here. He's from Pittsburgh. It's referred to in the column as the Paris of Appalachia. So I've been there before myself. Beautiful city. It gets a reputation that there's soot everywhere, but ever since they closed down all of the mills back in the 1980s, and people lost the highest industrial wage in the history of the planet. That's a phrase that was coined by a reporter I met from a weekly paper, alternative paper in Pittsburgh when I was covering a court case there back in the middle of the 1990s. Highest industrial wage in the history of the planet. Since they lost that, they've managed to bounce back through a lot of really good planning and put the city back together. And unfortunately, if you're a fan of a football team that doesn't win a lot, you have a lot of envy because of things that go on there. Right now, I want to mention, it's coming up on another break in just a moment. I'm going to try to squeeze a caller in. Caller, I've only got about a minute before the break, but you're on the air. Go ahead. You're on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. It's been a while. I've been in harvest, so I just wanted to thank you so much for the opportunity to let us, on both sides of the fence, call you and vent. And We on our side got our frustrations out by calling you and venting our opinion, whereas the other side is breaking things down. We need to gather together and try to get together. I don't remember for the life of me, after Obama won the second time, the right going out and burning down buildings and stuff. It's just ridiculous. And all of this is done by people that are busing people in. And they don't care if they burn a business down. When they get back on the bus and go home, the businesses in their town are still fine. So, the people in that town need to wise up and see what's going on around them and what the Democratic Party has done to them. It's made them crazy.
And I thank you for the call. Got to follow the money on that one. Who's paying for the buses? Who's paying maybe for the room nights? And are they actually getting checks for doing this? It wouldn't be the first time that operatives on any side were paid for their efforts, but it does raise some interesting questions. And if you can follow the money, some people are inferring that a lot of these organizations are coming from a Marxist-Leninist perspective. Randy Staple is from Idaho Weekly Briefing in just a few minutes. He's going to be on the air with us for right up until about 9 o'clock this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 40 at 840.